There are songs that become hits, and then there are songs that define an era. Billie Jean isn't just one of Michael Jackson's biggest hits, it's one of the most instantly recognizable songs in history. The second that bass line kicks in, you know exactly what's coming. You can see Michael on stage, sliding effortlessly across the floor, captivating millions. For years, most listeners thought they knew the story. A love song about a complicated relationship, maybe even a confession pulled from Michael's own life. But here's the truth. Billie Jean is not a love song. It's not even close. Behind that hypnotic groove lies a story about obsession, paranoia, and the suffocating reality of being famous. And once you hear the real inspiration, a disturbing mix of stalkers, lies, and public misperception, you'll never hear it the same way again. And it all started years before Michael even wrote the first note. The name Billie Jean has a certain elegance to it. Soft, memorable, and just mysterious enough to make you wonder who she is. When people first heard the song in 1983, the imagery seemed cinematic. A beautiful woman, a star at the height of his fame, a child whose eyes looked like his. It was the perfect recipe for romantic speculation. Radio DJs leaned into the idea. Michael Jackson's telling us about his secret love life, they teased. Gossip columns ran playful headlines asking, who is the real Billie Jean? And for the public, it was far more exciting to imagine Michael pouring his heart out than to believe he was simply telling a cautionary tale. Even the music video added fuel to the illusion. It didn't show any chaos or confrontation, just Michael moving through a dreamlike cityscape, his every step lighting up the ground beneath him. It looked cool, effortless, even flirtatious. No one thought twice about the lyrics because the visuals were so captivating. But the truth was much darker. Billie Jean wasn't a real person. She was a character, an amalgamation of unsettling encounters Michael had experienced since childhood. She represented a certain type of person, someone who would create an entire fantasy, insert themselves into his life story, and push that narrative until the world believed it. Michael explained it plainly in interviews. Billie Jean is kind of anonymous. It represents a lot of girls who would claim things like that. But in the early 1980s, even with Michael denying a personal connection, the public simply didn't want to let go of the idea. And to understand why he felt compelled to write about her at all, we have to go back, not to the Thriller era, but to his teenage years, when life as a Jackson brother meant facing a side of fame few people ever see. By the time Michael was 15, he had already performed in front of millions, toured the world, and topped charts multiple times. But success came with an unspoken reality. Being in the Jackson 5 meant living in a constant state of surveillance, not from cameras, but from people who wanted access. Fans weren't just in the audience. They were outside hotel lobbies, at the airport gate, waiting by the tour buses. Some were innocent superfans hoping for an autograph. Others were more determined, slipping past security and appearing in dressing rooms uninvited. And then there were the rumors. From the earliest Jackson 5 tours, Michael remembered hearing stories about women who claimed they were pregnant by one of the brothers, sometimes without ever having met them. These accusations weren't whispered gossip. They came in the form of handwritten letters, phone calls, even confrontations at venues. It was always the same pattern: a dramatic story, an appeal to emotion, and a request for contact or support. Michael, still just a teenager, began to understand that fame could attract people willing to say anything for attention or money. Years later, when writing for Thriller, those memories resurfaced. He thought about the women who had approached his brothers, about the rumors that followed them from city to city. And instead of writing about one person, he built a character that embodied them all, a fictional figure named Billie Jean. She would be glamorous, mysterious, and utterly convinced of her own story. she would represent the type of fan who would blur fantasy and reality until the two became indistinguishable. But while most of these experiences faded after the tour ended, one incident from the early 1980s was so disturbing that it stayed with Michael for life and gave Billie Jean an even sharper edge. By 1981, Michael Jackson was preparing to step into the biggest chapter of his career. Off the Wall had already proven he could dominate the charts as a solo artist, but he was hungry to push further, to create something no one had ever seen before. While he was in the studio laying the groundwork for what would become Thriller, a chilling situation unfolded in the background. It started innocently enough, at least as innocently as unsolicited fan mail can be. Michael had been receiving letters for years, but one woman's messages stood out. At first, they read like any other. Compliments on his music, admiration for his talent, promises that she was his biggest fan. But within weeks, the tone changed. The woman began claiming that Michael was the father of her twins. She wrote with absolute certainty, describing an entire relationship that had never happened. Every detail was fabricated, yet she wrote as if they were shared memories. Michael didn't respond. To him, engaging would only make things worse. But his silence didn't stop her. Instead, the letters became more emotional, more desperate, and then more dangerous. One day, an envelope arrived containing a photograph that left everyone shaken. In it, the woman was holding a gun to her child's head. In her letter, she said she planned to take both her own life and her baby's because Michael had rejected her. This was no longer just an overzealous fan. It was someone in deep crisis, and it was terrifying. Michael was in his early 20s, but this wasn't the kind of fame anyone could prepare you for. The fantasy she had built in her mind was so vivid that she was willing to harm herself and her children to make her story heard. Authorities were contacted, and she was eventually placed under psychiatric care for her safety. Michael didn't speak publicly about the incident at the time, but those close to him said it rattled him deeply. This wasn't just an isolated moment, it was proof of something he had feared for years, that fame could make you a target, not just for lies, but for dangerous obsession. When he later sat down to write Billie Jean, those memories weren't far from his mind. The paranoia in his delivery, the urgency in his tone, they were rooted in real fear. But when the song finally reached the world, the public didn't hear fear. They heard a story they wanted to believe, and they turned it into something completely different. When Billie Jean was released in January 1983, it didn't just enter the charts, it exploded. The song shot to #1 in more than a dozen countries, holding the top spot in the US for 7 consecutive weeks. It was the kind of hit that didn't just dominate the radio, it dominated the culture. But along with its success came something Michael hadn't intended: mass misinterpretation. The combination of a driving bass line, a slick dance groove, and Michael's smooth yet urgent vocal delivery made the track sound seductive. For casual listeners, the story in the lyrics, a woman claiming a man fathered her child, the man denying it, sounded like a romantic drama, a scandal, the kind of messy, tabloid-worthy love triangle that the public couldn't get enough of. Radio DJs leaned into the gossip. Some introduced the song as Michael's personal confession. Music magazines printed speculative stories, wondering if Billie Jean was a real woman. Even respected journalists asked Michael directly in interviews if the song was autobiographical, ignoring his repeated insistence that Billie Jean wasn't real. The music video, while visually groundbreaking, didn't help clear up the confusion. Directed by Steve Barron, it showed Michael walking alone at night, every square he stepped on lighting up magically. It was stylish, mysterious, even romantic in tone. No one thought twice about the lyrics because the visuals were so captivating. And then came the cultural ripple effect. Other artists recorded answer songs, stepping into Billie Jean's shoes to insist the child was indeed his. These tracks fed into the public's fantasy that there was a real relationship, a real scandal. Michael's denials only seemed to make people more curious. In an era before social media, fans filled the information gap with their own theories, passing along myths that became harder and harder to untangle from reality. The irony was painful. Michael had written Billie Jean partly to reclaim control of his story, to push back against false narratives. Instead, the public created an entirely new one. The song meant to highlight the dangers of fame ended up proving his point. People will believe the story they want, even if the truth is right in front of them. But for those who were willing to really listen, the truth was in the music itself, in the unease behind the groove. And to understand that, you have to strip away the glamour and hear Billie Jean for what it really is.
If you've ever danced to Billie Jean, it's easy to get lost in the rhythm. That bass line is hypnotic. The beat is crisp, and Michael's voice glides over it like silk. But if you step back and listen closely, really listen, the lyrics tell a completely different story. The opening lines set the tone immediately. She was more like a beauty queen from a movie scene. It sounds flattering at first, but the next line changes the mood. I said, "Don't mind, but what do you mean I am the one?" There's an edge there, confusion, even alarm. This isn't a man enjoying attention, it's a man caught off guard. Then comes the chorus, one of the most misread refrains in pop music history. Billie Jean is not my lover, she's just a girl who claims that I am the one, but the kid is not my son. On paper, it's a flat denial, but listen to how Michael delivers it. There's no anger, just an almost weary repetition, as if he's had to say this too many times before. The second verse deepens the unease. People always told me, be careful what you do, don't go around breaking young girls' hearts. It's advice that could apply to any young man, but in Michael's world, it carried life or death stakes for his reputation. One wrong move, or even the appearance of one, could spark a scandal that would follow him forever. And then there's the paranoia woven into the storytelling. Michael sings about how Billie Jean told my baby we danced till 3 and showed a photo of a baby crying. His eyes looked like mine. These are intimate, specific claims, the kind that make a lie more believable. In the music industry, where rumors can spread faster than facts, such details are dangerous. Obsession is the final thread. Billie Jean doesn't just make her claim privately, she tells the whole world. That's the nightmare for someone constantly in the public eye. Once a false story is out there, it's almost impossible to erase. Underneath it all is the weight of fame, the reality that the bigger you become, the more you attract people willing to rewrite your life for their benefit. Michael had been living with that since childhood, and in Billie Jean, you can hear him setting boundaries in the only safe way he knew, through art. That's why Billie Jean works on two levels. On the surface, it's a perfect pop song, infectious, danceable, timeless. But beneath that, it's a shield, a way for Michael to say, without naming names, this is the price of being me. And yet the public preferred the fantasy, which makes the song's legacy even more complicated and even more revealing. When Michael Jackson wrote Billie Jean, he wasn't thinking about weddings, romantic slow dances, or fueling tabloid gossip. He was thinking about survival. The brilliance of the track lies in its duality. You can play it in a club and lose yourself in the groove, never noticing the guarded tone in his voice. Or you can really pay attention to the lyrics and see the outline of a world most people never get to witness. A world where fame doesn't just bring fans, it brings predators. Michael often said Billie Jean wasn't about a single person, but a type of person. But the public clung to the idea that there must be a real Billie Jean. The myth was juicier than the truth. It's human nature to prefer scandal over caution, especially when it's wrapped in a beat this good. And that's what makes Billie Jean such a fascinating piece of music history. It's not just that the public got it wrong, it's that the misunderstanding proved Michael's point. He was warning us about the power of a false story and then watched in real time as people created one around the song itself. Decades later, the track is still one of his most celebrated works. It helped Thriller become the best-selling album of all time. It broke racial barriers on MTV, paving the way for black artists to dominate the channel. It inspired countless musicians across genres. But for Michael, it was also deeply personal, a reminder to stay guarded, to trust carefully, and to never let the narrative slip from his hands. It's not a love song. It's not a confession. It's a warning, and maybe even a plea. Don't believe everything you hear, and be careful who you let in.